The single habit that separates people who keep climbing from those who quietly plateau has nothing to do with talent and almost everything to do with what you choose to feed your mind each ordinary day. Think about that for a moment. Not talent, not timing, not the right context or the right upbringing, just a choice, one you make again and again in small and unremarkable moments that nobody else ever sees. Most of us were raised to believe that growth was something that happened to us inside classrooms, under instruction, with someone else setting the pace and handing us the next step. You followed the structure, you earned the certificate, you moved on, and somewhere in that process, a very dangerous idea took root that learning had a finish line. But here's the truth that almost no one tells you directly. The second that external pressure disappears, no more teachers, no more deadlines, no more grades waiting to judge your effort, your real education either begins or it quietly dies. The structure that was carrying you is gone. The responsibility of what happens next lands entirely on your own shoulders. And that moment, right there, is where most people make a choice they do not even realize they're making. They stop. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. They simply stop seeking, and they call it adulthood. So what are the people doing who never stop? And what does that actually look like in a real life, not a motivational poster? Let us break it down with something concrete. Picture two people entering the professional world at exactly the same starting point. Same company, same role, same salary, same first day nerves. The first person treats each day as something to survive and get through. Work ends, the laptop closes, and the evening fills itself with background noise. Entertainment, social scrolling, whatever is easy and asks nothing of them. They are not irresponsible. They are not failing at anything visible. They are simply comfortable. And comfort, as we will return to, carries a hidden cost that does not announce itself until much later. The second person does something slightly different. Nothing extreme, nothing that looks impressive from the outside. But every single day, even when they are tired, even when the time available is small, they consume something useful, a chapter of a book, a 10-minute conversation with someone who knows more than they do, a podcast episode during the walk to work, one specific skill, practiced quietly and consistently, that nobody else in their office is bothering to develop. And crucially, they do not wait for a perfect block of free time to appear on the calendar. They use the gaps, the commute, the lunch break, the 15 minutes before the day officially starts. They have understood something that sounds almost too simple, that small, regular deposits into your own capability add up, and they add up faster than almost anyone expects. Now here is the part that most people miss when they try to compare these two paths. After 12 months, the gap between them is nearly invisible. You would not notice it at a glance. It would not show up clearly in a performance review or a salary comparison. But stretch those same behaviors out across 5 years, and the distance between those two people looks like different life trajectories entirely. One has grown, taken on new responsibilities, built genuine capability, and found themselves in rooms they could not have accessed when they started. The other is still in roughly the same position, genuinely puzzled about why opportunity seems to pass them by. This is not a story about intelligence or raw ability. It is a story about daily repetition and what it quietly builds. What you do in every unremarkable, ordinary day is what eventually becomes your extraordinary life. And here is where people tend to misunderstand this idea. They assume learning needs to feel significant to count. They imagine it requires long stretches of deep focus, expensive courses, or major life reorganization. But consider the simple math. 10 pages of reading per day, not 100, just 10, adds up to more than 3,500 pages across a single year. That is the equivalent of 12 to 15 books. 12 to 15 new frameworks for thinking about problems. 12 to 15 opportunities to encounter an idea that shifts how you see an obstacle, a decision, or a possibility. The arithmetic is not the challenge. The challenge is showing up for it when the day has already been long and your couch is right there. Because some mornings, many mornings, you will simply not feel like it. You will feel heavy, slow, distracted, or just deeply uninterested in the idea of improving yourself right now. And that feeling is not a character flaw. It is completely normal, and it visits even the most disciplined people regularly. The difference is that those people have stopped waiting for the feeling to change before they act. They have understood that growth does not consult your mood before it requires your participation. It only asks what you actually do. The person who learns exclusively when motivated will always fall behind the person who has made learning a default, not because one is more gifted, but because one is more consistent. And there is a hidden structural reason why most people never build that kind of consistency, one that almost nobody is willing to say plainly. It begins in the morning, not as a metaphor, literally in the first minutes after you wake up. The early part of your day is doing something your brain does not advertise openly. It is setting the baseline for how the rest of your hours will feel and function. Think about what a typical morning looks like for most people right now. The alarm sounds. You open your eyes, still groggy, and before a single intentional thought has fully formed, your hand is already moving toward the phone. In under a minute, your mind is processing other people's messages, other people's arguments, other people's curated highlights, and breaking news. The nervous system registers all of it as stimulation. The day has technically started, but you have already surrendered the first moments of your own consciousness to content designed by someone else for their purposes, not yours. Now picture a completely different version of the same morning. The alarm sounds. You pause before reaching for anything. You sit for a moment, not emptily, not passively, but deliberately quiet. You take one full, slow breath. You think about one thing that actually matters today. Maybe you open a page of something worth reading. Maybe you take 5 minutes to move your body before your mind gets cluttered. Then you decide, consciously, explicitly, what this particular day is for. Same 24 hours that everyone else has. Completely different internal trajectory. Here is the question most people are uncomfortable answering honestly when they consider their mornings. Take two people with the same alarm set for the same time. One scrolls until they realize they are late, then rushes through the morning in a low-grade panic, arriving at their first task already mentally scattered. The other pauses, breathes, chooses a direction, and moves through the first hour with intention. Which one is actually going to perform at their real capacity when difficulty shows up later in the day? You already know the answer, and if you are being genuinely honest with yourself, you also know which one you have more often been lately. Here is the encouraging part. You do not need a rigid system or a militaristic pre-dawn protocol to change this. You do not need a color-coded planner or a 30-step morning framework someone sells in a course. You need intention, the decision to treat the first portion of your day as yours before you hand it to anything else. Even 20 focused minutes accomplishes this, because those 20 minutes send a repeating message to every part of your brain. I am the one steering today. When that message accumulates over days and weeks, it builds something real. Sharper attention, steadier decision-making, and a growing confidence that you are not simply reacting to life as it arrives. But controlling the morning is only one layer. The deeper, longer-lasting shift comes from something most people overlook entirely. Your mental environment, everything you consume, listen to, read, and surround yourself with across a whole day is not passive decoration. It is actively programming how you interpret the world. An environment saturated with complaint, cynicism, distraction, or low-value content does not simply waste your time. It literally trains the pattern recognition systems in your brain to scan for evidence of whatever it keeps receiving. Feed your mind a steady stream of negativity and scarcity, and it will begin to find both everywhere it looks, even where they do not exist. Feed it growth-oriented content, real stories of people solving real problems, ideas that expand what seems possible, and it begins to find opportunity and potential in places it previously ignored or dismissed entirely. This does not mean retreating from reality or pretending that difficulty does not exist. It means being deliberate about the ratio, spending 10 minutes each day with something genuinely useful rather than filling that same window with content you will not remember by dinner time. Choosing one video that teaches a concrete idea rather than watching 6 that only entertain without leaving anything behind. These redirections do not feel revolutionary in the moment. Over time, they are. The people who change most dramatically across years are almost always the ones who change their inputs first, quietly, before any external results appeared. They began protecting what entered their mind with the same seriousness and intentionality that most people reserve only for their physical diet. And they did it long before anyone around them noticed a difference, which leads directly to the point where most people nod along, feel genuinely inspired, and then close the video and do exactly nothing different. Because consuming good ideas without ever converting them into behavior is just a more sophisticated form of standing still. Knowledge that never makes contact with action is not wisdom. It is simply interesting information that accumulates without changing anything. Every time you absorb something genuinely valuable, the productive question to ask yourself is not, "That was interesting." It is, "What is one thing I can actually do with this before this day ends?" Even the smallest possible application counts. If you understand something new about communication, try one different approach in the very next conversation you have. If you learn about a habit worth building, change one small behavior today. Not conceptually, not eventually, but concretely and today. Knowledge only becomes real power at the exact moment you do something with it. Your social environment plays into this more than most people want to honestly examine. The people you spend the most time around are setting your default sense of what is normal, what is achievable, and what is worth attempting. If your closest relationships are built on a shared language of complaint, blame, and comfortable limitation, on stories about what cannot be done and why trying is naive, that worldview seeps into your own thinking through proximity, gradually, without ever asking permission. You absorb the ceiling of the room you spend the most time in. Contrast that with regular exposure to people who are genuinely building things, who treat obstacles as data rather than verdicts, who push you with their example rather than their advice, and your own expectations quietly recalibrate upward to match. You do not need to eliminate anyone from your life to change this. But you may need to be more intentional about what you build around yourself, beyond those existing relationships. Consider what access actually looks like right now. Every conversation, interview, course, biography, and recorded lesson from essentially any person worth learning from is available in your pocket, free or nearly so, at any hour. The limitation is not access. The limitation has never been access. It is what you consistently choose to prioritize with your attention when access is not the obstacle. Are you actively using what you have available, or are you simply carrying the possibility of it around with you while filling the actual time differently? Because the real distinction between people who transform over time and people who only intend to is observable and specific. The ones who change are spending time studying the actual paths taken by people who arrived where they want to go. Not passively consuming inspiration, actively extracting the underlying logic. What did those people prioritize when nothing was working? How did they structure their time when motivation was absent? What did they do with failure that others do not? Success in nearly every domain leaves patterns, and those patterns are accessible to anyone paying close enough attention. Now we arrive at the part of this conversation that is the least comfortable, but probably the most important for where you actually are right now. Challenges. Not the hypothetical kind discussed in philosophy. The real specific kind, where your plan collides with a situation that does not cooperate, and you have to decide in real time what that experience is going to mean for you and what you are going to do next. Because difficulty is not a disruption to growth. It is not an obstacle placed between you and the version of yourself you are trying to reach. Difficulty is the actual mechanism through which genuine growth occurs. You do not build real capability in stretches of unbroken comfort. You build it in the moments when you keep showing up anyway. Despite uncertainty, despite looking foolish, despite failing in front of people you respect. Think about something from your own past. An exam you failed, a position you did not get, a relationship that ended badly, or a project that collapsed despite your best effort. In the middle of it, it felt like evidence against you. Proof that something was fundamentally wrong or missing. But when you look back, with even a little distance, what usually becomes visible is something different. That failure often pushed you to develop a capability you would not have otherwise developed. That rejection often redirected you towards something better suited to who you actually were. That difficulty often revealed a specific gap worth closing, one you would never have noticed without the pressure of that particular situation. And here is the quiet truth underneath all of that. No experience is genuinely wasted if you are paying attention to what it is trying to show you. Every setback is carrying information. Your only job is to receive it rather than resist it. Life is not going to follow the outline you wrote for it. There will be extended seasons where your genuine best effort produces genuinely disappointing results, where you execute the plan correctly and things still do not work, where the progress feels invisible and the process feels endless. This is not a signal that the approach is wrong. It is part of every meaningful timeline. Every person who has ever built something worth having has endured long stretches of working without visible evidence that the work was accumulating. The ones who eventually see results are not the ones who had a smoother path. They are the ones who consistently refuse to interpret difficulty as a permanent verdict. So what actually separates the person who builds through difficulty from the one who gets stopped by it? It comes down to a single mental reframe that sounds simple but changes almost everything. Replace the closed question, "Why is this happening to me?" with the open one, "What is this preparing me for?" The first question generates only self-pity and loops back into itself without producing anything useful. The second one changes the function of the obstacle entirely. A setback stops being a verdict on your worth and becomes a piece of information about what needs to change. A failure stops being evidence of your limitation and becomes a technical problem, diagnosable, workable, solvable. These are not just different attitudes toward the same event. They produce genuinely different outcomes because they generate genuinely different actions. Consider athletes. A poor training session is not treated as evidence that the athlete does not belong. It is logged, analyzed, and used as feedback. Entrepreneurs who build companies that last have almost uniformly encountered serious loss somewhere in their history, sometimes loss that looked catastrophic from the outside. The loss did not end them. It refined the thinking, corrected the direction, and stripped away what was not working. Your reaction to challenge is not fixed or predetermined. It is a trainable skill. And like every skill, it gets sharper through deliberate, repeated practice. You practice it by choosing again and again, even in small daily moments of friction, to look for the lesson rather than confirming the familiar story that this is simply too hard for you. That practice compounds. Over time, it becomes your default response. But understanding how to think about challenge is one piece. Acting through difficulty consistently over time is where discipline enters. And this is where most people's real struggle lives. Discipline is not a fixed personality trait you were either born with or not. It is a practice, a decision, repeated daily, to do what your future self genuinely needs instead of what your present self most immediately wants. Motivation is real and useful, but it is not reliable enough to build a life on. Some mornings it shows up with energy and clarity. Many mornings it does not appear at all. If the entire structure of your progress depends on how inspired you happen to feel when you wake up, you have already embedded inconsistency into your foundation. Think honestly about how many times you have begun something with genuine excitement, a learning commitment, a health routine, a creative project, and then watch that initial energy dissolve over the following weeks as real life introduced friction and competing demands. The issue was rarely the goal. The issue was the absence of a bridge between the initial intention and the repeated unglamorous action required to actually get somewhere. That bridge is discipline, and building it is less about willpower than most people assume. The practical shift is this: reduce the number of conditions your action requires. Not, I will engage with this when I am well rested, fully motivated, and have 2 uninterrupted hours available. But I will engage with this for 10 focused minutes, right now, in the conditions I actually have. The second version eliminates almost every excuse before it can fully form. 10 minutes. Show up. That is enough to begin building the architecture that eventually makes consistency feel natural rather than forced. And once you have shown up for 10 minutes, you will almost always continue beyond them. The hardest part is never the middle. It is always just starting. And here is the dimension of discipline that most people never really engage with. The one that makes the difference between short-term effort and lasting change. It is not primarily about doing more. It is about consistently saying no to the things that pull you toward ease and familiarity when your future self requires something more demanding. Every time you decline a distraction and redirect towards something worthwhile, you are doing something concrete at the level of your neurology. You are reinforcing a pathway. You are literally training your brain to prioritize differently. Over weeks and months of repetition, that training changes what feels automatic. Things that once required significant effort begin to require less. Actions that previously felt like sacrifice begin to feel like simply who you are. This is the point where self-control and identity begin to merge. You are no longer just managing your behavior from moment to moment. You are gradually reshaping the default person who shows up. And that shift, quiet and invisible while it is happening, is one of the most profound changes any person can experience in their own life. And this brings us directly to the final idea, the one that ties everything together and may be the most overlooked piece of all. Growth is not a destination that you eventually arrive at and then rest inside. It is a posture, a way of orienting yourself toward the world that must be actively maintained. The mindset that keeps you growing is one that remains genuinely open to being wrong, curious about what it does not yet understand, and honest, without defensiveness about where its current limits actually are. Not as a performance, as a real internal orientation. And here is something worth sitting with. The people who maintain this posture longest are not the ones who never doubt themselves. They are the ones who have learned not to let doubt become a reason for stopping. Doubt, discomfort, and uncertainty are not signals that you have taken a wrong turn. They are almost always signals that you are exactly at the edge of where real growth happens. The moment a person quietly decides they are finished learning, whether they say it aloud or simply behave that way, is the moment their ceiling becomes fixed and permanent, regardless of their natural ability. And here's the thing that matters most about where you are right now. No matter your age, your background, your current skill level, or the specific circumstances of your life today, there is a next version of you being built from the choices you make in the ordinary gaps. The Tuesday evening when nothing urgent is demanding your attention. The commute. The 20 minutes between finishing dinner and whatever comes next. These are not empty spaces to be filled with whatever requires the least from you. They are the actual material from which your future self is constructed. One small choice at a time, compounding silently in a direction you are always, whether consciously or not, choosing. So the question is not whether growth is available to you. It absolutely is, in any direction you genuinely decide to pursue. The only real question is whether you are going to treat today like that actually matters. Because it does, not in some abstract or inspirational sense. In the most concrete and practical sense possible, every single day either adds something to who you are becoming or it does not. There is no genuinely neutral ground. Staying comfortable and still in a world that keeps accelerating forward is not a safe middle option. It is a slow, quiet, incremental fall behind, invisible for a while, then suddenly uncomfortably visible. You do not have to make that choice. A different decision is available to you right now. Not when the circumstances improve, not when motivation finally arrives, not when you have more time or fewer distractions. Now, in the exact situation you are currently in, with the specific resources and the specific limitations you actually have today, start from here. Build one small habit. Engage seriously with one genuinely useful idea. Take one concrete action on something you just learned, rather than simply feeling good about having heard it. Do that again tomorrow, and the day after that. Do not wait until you feel ready, because that particular feeling does not precede action. It follows it, always, without exception. Every person you genuinely admire did not begin their path from a position of certainty. They began from a decision, the specific private decision that they were going to keep developing, regardless of how conditions looked, regardless of how slowly progress seemed to be arriving, regardless of whether anyone else was watching or validating them for it. And one day, not in a sudden dramatic moment, but gradually, and then unmistakably, they looked back across time and saw clearly how far that quiet, daily decision had carried them from where they began. That same path is available to you, not to a hypothetical, better positioned, more fortunate version of you, to you, as you are, in this exact moment. If something in this shifted how you are thinking, even one idea, even one question, do yourself one real favor before you close this. Hit the like button right now. It costs you 1 second, and it genuinely helps this content reach more people who need it. Then drop one word in the comments, just one, that names what you are committing to starting today. Reading, discipline, focus, consistency. Write it down, because the act of naming a commitment publicly makes it real in a way that keeping it only in your head never quite does. That one word is the beginning of something. Keep learning, keep showing up, and hold on to this clearly. Your future is not defined by where you happen to begin. It is defined entirely and always by what you choose to do next.